It's Tuesday, July 22nd. I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast, and it is a hell of a day to talk ball because talking ball season is officially, we're pretty much starting here. And joining me to do just that today is Justin Boone. Boone, what's going on, buddy?
Man, is it every team in training camp now? This is super exciting. This is a great time of year.
Dude, I've seen clips already. You know, Justin Herbert whipping it down the field to Jalen Reagor. Is there a better time to be alive than right now?
You know, once you see people overreacting to the practice clips, you know we're back at that point, right? You have to sort of just calm everybody down. Like, hey, it's just one catch in practice. They're cycling through. Lots of guys are getting opportunity with the first team offense. Let's not overreact too much to everything. But inevitably, people are going to do it anyway. And we're going to do it, right? I think we have to do that with ourselves too and try to hold ourselves back from getting too pumped up.
I was going to say it's either overreacting to practice clips or just sharing quotes from a player, a coach, a team decision maker that completely confirms your already held opinions, which a hand up, I'm going to do that. I'm going to be doing that. No question. Boone will probably do it as well. You guys watching and listening will do it, but we will try to make smart decisions here as NFL training camps officially, they're dusting off the cobwebs this week. All the things are happening. Before we dive into today's topic, I do have to share some big news, and I'm going to be absolutely pummeling you guys over the head with all throughout the next month or so. We have launched a new Yahoo Fantasy YouTube page to give you a one-stop shop for all your fantasy needs. That is right. We are slowly but surely breaking from the Yahoo Sports main YouTube page to the fantasy-only page. That page is officially live now. Even bigger news, this show is going to be live every Sunday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific on this Yahoo Fantasy YouTube page starting August 4th. That is an important date because once it's August 4th, all of our full episodes and all the content from this show and all throughout the Yahoo Fantasy universe is going to be on the new YouTube channel and no longer on the Yahoo Sports channel. You can literally, if you're watching this on YouTube right now, you can literally click on the Yahoo icon on the lower third right now to subscribe and get alerts when we go live on the new page. If you don't, I will take personal offense to it. If you just listen to the show on audio, you don't have to do anything. I mean, we'd love it if you subscribe on YouTube, but nothing changes for you out there. Today, let's move into the show. We are essentially kind of soft launching our draft season coverage by looking at 6 observations from our layest Yahoo Staff Mock Draft. It's a Yahoo standard format, half PPR. Justin, you put this whole thing together. You got a great crew, and you're handling the write-up on the website, I believe, as well.
For sure. That is going up. And yeah, let's shout out to everybody that participated in this one. And we had a bunch of Yahoo folks, me, you, Ray Garvin, and Chris Allen, who are going to be contributors this year. But so many people from the industry, and you and I have talked about this off camera, so many people in the industry are very generous with their time. They are very kind and willing to step up whenever that call goes out. And for this one, I'm going to make sure I don't miss anybody here. I feel like this is like my wedding speech when you don't want to forget any of the thank yous, but Ian Hartitz of Fantasy Life, our buddy Rich Rebar from Sharp Football, Jennifer Eakins from 4 for 4, Nathan Yonke from PFF, Dave Kluge from Football Guys, Ryan Heath from Fantasy Points, who I think might have had the best draft of anyone, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. Ben Gretsch from Stealing Signals, and then Derek Brown from Fantasy Pros. Just an awesome crew, really great people. And I think it turned out pretty well this one. I'm excited to talk about some of these takeaways.
Yeah, banger of a cast. I actually liked the team that I drafted. It was just like I think my first official mock draft with Yahoo, at least, probably going to be the only team I like. I'm sure I won't like any of my real teams as much as this one. So that's just the way it goes. But let's waste no more time. We've got 6 takeaways to get into today. The first one, Boone, is multiple early running backs is the way to go this year. Explain why.
So in past years, I've leaned towards the hero RB approach, and I'm sure everyone watching this show knows what the hero RB approach is, but just in case, it's taking that one very good running back early and then waiting a while before you get your second running back. And I feel confident doing that because I think I'm pretty good at finding a value along the way or just unloading a lot of bullets later in the draft on the running back position and hoping that you hit that one. Or I'm also pretty aggressive on the waiver wire throughout the year. So if that injury guy pops up, or if that unexpected breakout guy pops up, I'm going to be the first one there, putting all of my fob down to try to get that player. And I think that the number 2 running back spot in your lineup is normally the easiest one to kind of backfill like that. However, this year, and I've noticed this before this mock, and I really noticed it in this mock, I'm starting to change that approach, and I'm starting to make sure that I get 2 running backs in the first 4 rounds. So not RB heavy by any means. We're not talking about, it doesn't have to be 2 running backs in the first 2 rounds. It doesn't have to be 3 running backs in the first 4 rounds or anything like that, but making sure that you get 2 in the first 4 rounds, because I think there's a pretty big drop off after that. And if you look at some of the rosters in this one, that was the approach I took. It was the approach you took. Ray took that approach. And of course, Ryan Heath, who I feel like I'm going to bring up a bunch of times, he also took that approach. And I think his team, like I said, is so good because he got a potentially elite running back, wide receiver, and quarterback combo in rounds 1, 2, and 3. He got Devon Achane, he got Amon-Ra St. Brown, and he got Jaden Daniels. And then he comes back, he gets that second running back, a guy that has a ton of potential in O'Marion Hampton, who we don't know what he could be, right? We've talked about him, that he could have an amazing season, especially if Najee Harris gets off to a slow start with the team because of the off-field stuff, the injury that he had there to his eye. But then you look at Ryan's team, and he comes back around, and in the middle rounds, really fills up at receiver. And that's another thing that we're going to talk about a little bit later. I think that's an important takeaway from this one too. But once we get to the 5th round, that drop off at running back, it comes pretty quickly. And I feel like I could really poke holes, and we've done a good job of this on the last 2 shows that we've done, trying to be those contrarians. I think once you get to the 5th round, all of the running backs in that range and beyond have some pretty significant red flags on them. So maybe it's just that I don't want to get involved with those guys as much this year, where in years past, I thought there were better values in that range. But overall, I'm really trying to make sure that I get 2 running backs in the first 4 rounds.
Yep, this is how both you and I built the teams. As you mentioned, there were 6 running backs that went in the first round. It was Bijan Robinson, Saquon Barkley, Jahmyr Gibbs, Christian McCaffrey, Devon Achane, and Ashton Genty. So that makes sense to me. I think that this is generally how most first rounds are going to flow. Maybe in certain leagues, people aren't going to want to take Christian McCaffrey in the first round. Here's the deal. If he just makes it through August and there's nothing but positive reports and he's out there participating, he's not currently injured, he's going to end up being a first round pick in fantasy. Whether that ages well or not is kind of a separate conversation. That is just what is going to happen. So I think this is pretty reflective of first rounds. And I want to come back to some of these running backs in the first couple of rounds and that whole thing. But I just want to also underscore your point about that 5th round being a bit of a drop-off for running backs, because I had the first overall pick in this draft. I went Jamar Chase, and then at the 2-3 turn, I ended up going Jonathan Taylor, Lamar Jackson. So obviously got to wait 2 more full rounds to come back at the end of the 4th round. I took Alvin Kamara, and I felt okay about that as my second run. I felt okay. I wasn't like, hell yeah. Again, this is kind of how I feel about Kamara this year. I'm not like, hell yeah, love Kamara. So excited to have him as my running back too. But I also think totally fine to take him here. And I'm pretty happy with I think there's some, I do think there's some hidden upside with the Saints offense, just because I think these are good players. And I think Kellen Moore is going to throw the ball a lot, and I think that he is going to run a lot of plays. Like that has just been the course of Kellen Moore's offenses. So there's some like statistical upside in this offense, even if it's not going to be that great of a unit that was a little bit capped last year, because I liked the way that Clint Kubiak designed it, but it was very run heavy. It was slow paced. That's not going to be the case with Kellen Moore this year. So again, kind of okay with taking Kamara there, but again, that was it, feeling okay. Every other running back pick I looked at there, I was like, really not trying to take Joe Mixon, who ends up going in the early portion of round 5. Another guy that I think is an okay click, but slightly less upside than a guy like Kamara. And then again, it starts to get into that rookie running back range where Travion Henderson went in the 5th round, Caleb Johnson. We covered that on our recent episode, where we do think there are some potential warts in those guys' profile. James Conner, actually, who came back around to you, I think that was a real nice pick by you. I actually weighed Kamara and Conner together, but other than that, it's like then we get into a full tier drop to guys like Tony Pollard, Isaiah Pacheco, Dave Montgomery, DeAndre Swift in round 6. So I agree with you that I think that 5th round is where the running back bets maybe start to get dicey. And I think we will see people converge in that path there. And it's either they'll go for the youth and the upside with Henderson or Caleb Johnson, or they'll go with these kind of boring old vets who we've seen for a while, which is the way that you and I went here.
Yeah, and I think like Kamara and Connor are 2 guys that are going in that mid to low end RB2 range and yet still have RB1 upside. Like I mentioned this, and I feel like it's just a broken record by me, but every single year, James Conner, since he's been in Arizona, has been a top 15 fantasy back in fantasy points per game. He just keeps doing it every single year. And the thing that I always want to bring up with him, I did it last year, and again this year I'm saying it, is where you can get him, which is a lot cheaper than all the other guys that are really up in that, top 15. You don't have to pay up to get him. And then you can come back around and get Trey Benson, which I did in this draft. I got him later at the 9-10 turn. And it's not really going to cost you that much to lock up that Arizona backfield. But I feel pretty confident that if Connor does miss time, which people kind of blow that out of proportion. I know he missed time early in his career. He'll miss a couple games potentially. All running backs miss a couple games. Maybe that cliff will come, that age cliff eventually for him. But based on what we saw last year, I'm not that worried that it's going to come this season. And even if it does, I have Trey Benson there, who I like what we've seen from him in kind of limited stints, right? So locking down that backfield for what I feel is a pretty cheap cost, a 5th and a 9th round pick. If I had known that I could have done that, if I knew Connor was going to be there for me, I might not have even taken a running back, one of the running backs in the 3rd and 4th. I might have only gone with 1 instead of 2 there. But I really like the fact that I can throw Connor in the flex, and I know that I have that locked down with Benson there as well.
Yeah, I like that. And you took Connor at running back 23. I think there's a lot of ceiling there, and the risk is pretty much all baked in that he either declines or maybe Clayton Adams moving on to Dallas and taking some of the run game ideas there with him, as the former offensive line, like run game kind of mastermind there. Maybe that goes away. But I think, again, all that risk is sort of priced in. When we go back to these early round running backs here, before we move on to takeaway 2, where do you think the tiers break or broke in this draft in terms of like once we get to a certain group, this is where I'm not liking the running back bets as much in rounds like, let's just say 2 to 3 earlier than what we were talking about it before.
Honestly, I don't really mind pretty much any of the guys that went in those first 4 rounds. Like even you're talking about your hesitation with Kamara, but Kamara, he's put up good numbers like even last year. And who is there to challenge him? We talked about that a bit on the last show, right? Like I was a little bit worried about Kendre Miller and potentially Devin Neal, the rookie there. But then they bring in Cam Akers. So that tells me like they're still trying to find that number 2 back. I don't think they have somebody that's all of a sudden going to eat into Kamara's workload. And there is some potential upside with the new coaching staff there. So I really like some of these guys. I don't want to spoil some of the, best picks that we're going to talk about later, but Chase Brown here in the 3rd round, this is a guy that I am targeting basically in every draft. Last year, from week 4 on, was a top 7 fantasy back in fantasy points per game in half PPR leagues. I don't see any reason why he can't do that again. Hopefully the Bengals can get the contract situation sorted out with some of those defensive guys that are unhappy. Let's get those guys in there. I think this team could be better. I think he could get more scoring opportunity. I'm not that worried there about any of the other options in that backfield. Zach Moss coming back from injury, Taj Brooks, the rookie. I think they're just going to be complementary pieces. I don't think they're coming for the top role by any means. And Chase Brown proved last year he can handle big workloads and he could put up good fantasy points. I think this guy might be like a round 1 value that people are getting in the 3rd round right now. I highly recommend everybody should be out there trying to get him.
I think that Chase Brown is where the tier drops off to like another group at running back and I kind of hesitated between, I took Lamar Jackson at the top of the 3rd round, and Brown was maybe like my last tier of running backs where I do think there's a drop off to the Kenneth Walker, Breece Hall, Kyron Williams, like that, James Cook, that group of guys. I think, by the way, one thing I will note is that I do think Amari and Hampton, who I don't want to keep giving Ryan Heath a lot of credit because you keep doing it, but I think he'll be a 3rd round pick here in short order at the like bare minimum. I think he has a chance to really, really rise. So he might end up finding his way above this like Hall Walker tier and into like the Chase Brown types. But that was where running back sort of dropped off to me. And we'll come back to elite quarterbacks because I decided to go with Lamar Jackson there instead of Chase Brown. But I do think that's kind of the last one I see in this group of like, all right, like locked in running back one status. And we'll talk more about Chase Brown in particular because I think there's some stuff to pull on there. But let's get to observation takeaway number 2, which is in tandem. Like, hey, this thing pretty much flows well together. If we're going running backs early, you like going the multiple running backs in the first few rounds because, in your opinion, Boone, we got to be prioritizing wide receivers in the middle rounds this year.
Yeah, as we transition from the other one, I will make one more point, but it all ties together like you're saying. And that's last year, there wasn't as many like big waiver wire pickups at running back. Overall, there was a lot of good health. I know Christian McCaffrey went down and that one happened early, but as somebody that writes a weekly waiver wire column, there just wasn't a lot of great options popping up throughout the season. And maybe that changes this year. Like maybe we'll see a ton of injuries and that'll open up, paths for backups to get in there and have a big impact. But this all might be connected. And I'm not trying to go like all, strings on a corkboard here and like trying to, Charlie Day or whoever trying to explain it all. But the league goes to 17 games, several years ago now. More teams seem since then to have gone to these committee backfields or tandem backfields, getting more guys involved, which then reduces the strain on a lot of these running backs. And the results are fewer injuries, which is great in real life. That's what we want to see, right? We don't want to see guys get hurt by any means. That's the worst part of watching the NFL and of fantasy football. But inevitably, I think we're going to see, less out of nowhere running backs pop up in fantasy. Less of those kind of surprise plays pop up, especially in the second half of the season when it always used to happen. Guys would get worn down. So that is just another reason why I think it's important to go with the running backs early this year, because I'm not as confident that we're going to see as many injuries and guys pop up there. Now, when we switch to the wide receivers, like, my God, and we're here with, Mr. Reception Perception. So like you can give us like the receiver takes on a bunch of these guys, but you must be in agreement with me. Like the value in this range from rounds 5 to 7, it's incredible. Like I think I could make a pretty good case for all of these guys. Like I think I almost want every single one on my team if I can. And I know that sounds strange because I only took one in this range, but I can explain that. I mean, my 7th round pick was at the very end of the round. So at that point, I think we did kind of get past that. And I was deciding to make another pick there, but we could talk about that more in a second. Regardless, the receivers from rounds 5 to round 7, Matt, do you agree like this is such a great range to attack for receivers in fantasy this year?
Well, and let's be super clear. You ended up going with Sam Laporta was your 7th round pick that you're mentioning, which came after like a pretty big receiver run, which in any of these industry leagues, the receivers always get pushed up the board. I don't know if you agree with me, but I feel like any league I do with like all hardcore like writers, content creators, whatever, the receivers always get pushed up a little bit. I mean, Jaden Higgins going to the damn 7th round, like that ain't happening in your work league with your buddies who don't watch the NFL draft and are like, coming off of the haze of the offseason. Josh Downs in the damn Jacoby Myers in the 7th round. Like that's not real. So I do think that's why maybe you, even if you like the receivers in this range, you end up missing out on a lot of them because they really got pushed up. But I agree with you that there's a lot of really good bets in this range. I kind of tried to kick off the party with George Pickens at the top of the 5th round because I really just think he's got a chance to have a big season. I've talked about it a lot. I've never been like a proactive Pickens bro, but I think I really, really am going to be this year because he's just in such a great environment for fantasy production. He is a guy that really is going to be able to thrive at that X receiver position. And ultimately, like I look at the names that came after him, Metcalf, I think, is going to be volatile. Jalen Waddle, I think, is going to be volatile. Jamison Williams, Xavier Worthy. Now, worth noting, we did this mock draft before the Rashee Rice suspension news. So I think Worthy actually would, he's a little more appealing now than he was then. But still, like all these guys are going to be volatile. I think Pickens has the highest touchdown ceiling and, might play in the best offensive environment for a receiver as opposed to all the guys in there. Maybe Jamison Williams could be the other guy there, but we talked about our concerns with the Lions. So yeah, man, I think that I did the show with Rich Rebar for Contrarian Corner, and I'm curious as your thoughts on that I think there's a chance that wide receiver rankings by the end of the year get totally flipped around here. And some of these guys that, I'm not saying that some of the guys that we think going early are going to be disappointing, but I do think there's a lot of upward mobility for some of these guys in the rounds like 5 to 7 range in our draft here.
Yeah, like these guys are going in the range of like, wide receiver 3, maybe even wide receiver 4 by the end of that 7th round. And yet, like I said, I feel like I can make a case for almost any of them to get up into the wide receiver 2 range, the top 20, top 24 this year. So, maybe it's a bit of hindsight analysis for me, because I only took one wide receiver in that range, that I regretted that Sam Laporta pick. I think, the James Conner one, I totally agree with. The Laporta one, we could talk about that when we get to tight ends in a second. But I just look at this range here. And if we're talking about that build where I'm going to explain why I think it is good to try to go after an elite quarterback or an elite tight end. I don't normally do both in the same draft. Normally it's one or the other for me. You do that, you get one really solid receiver early, you get a couple running backs early, and then you backfill that receiver in this range. You find those upside guys. And for me, I took Chris Olave. Like, I think the only thing really holding him back, because I also share your optimism potentially about that Saints offense. I know the quarterback situation, kind of an unknown, but I still feel like that offense could be better than people realize. And Olave, it's just the health. It's just the concussion thing that I think people are so scared of. I'm pretty sure you could make a case like production wise for him. The guy's a guy that could put up 80 yards any given week. He probably, if he was fully healthy, should be up in the top 20. You could even make a case like for putting him closer to like a Garrett Wilson potentially. So as my wide receiver,
I'm gonna stop you there though. I'm gonna stop you there though, because I'm gonna tell you right now that you are wrong about this. People do not agree with you on this opinion that that Chris Olave is good, and the only question is that is the health. And I could tell you this because I just put out my top 15 wide receivers 25 and under. And I would say the two things that people hated the most about the list, besides the fact that they can't read and that it is 25 and under, and people don't know that like Nico Collins and CeeDee Lamb are 26 and don't know how to type into Google how old is, I mean, you can be a total dork and like just at Grok, how old is CeeDee Lamb now? But whatever. Anyway, rant for another time. Besides that, the two things people hated was how high I had Josh Downs and how high I had Chris Olave, because I think people look back at Chris Olave being drafted as the wide receiver 12 last year, 25th overall, and are so burned by that, not just because of the concussion issues, but also just the lack of touchdowns and the lack of like real spike weeks, that I think the public's opinion of Chris Olave is not as positive as you are kind of painting with a broad brush here. But if you like Olave, as it seems like you do, and if people can't tell, I do as well, I think that only creates more opportunity for value.
And it's liking him too in this position, right? When I was able to get Malik Neighbors and Nico Collins at the 1-2 turn, I have my top 2 receivers set, and now Olave can just come in and be hopefully that guy that I think he can be. But if not, it's not that much risk as my wide receiver 3. And I think I could find somebody else to step into that spot. So it's sort of balancing the two. But again, like everybody in this range, there was so many names that I was considering instead of Olave in that spot. He was the one that I just looked at having a ton of upside, because I still do view him as a player that could potentially reach a ceiling that I guess people are out on. And you're right, because his ADP is probably even a little bit lower than where I took him here.
It definitely is. I mean, I've gotten him in like the 7th or 8th round at times. I mean, from a ADP perspective, consensus wise, he's a little bit lower. Like, what? Again, no one's asking you to take Chris Olave and count on him as a wide receiver 1 at this point. He's going like outside the top 30 players of the position. So I agree. He's a big part of what makes this tier very interesting. And I mean, just history is instructive, Boone, right? And like, if we go back to last year, the wide receivers that we are now drafting in the first couple of rounds, and I feel really good about most of these guys here. But Brian Thomas Jr., Malik Neighbors, like these guys were not they were deeper. Lad McConkey, obviously. Drake London was going pretty high. He's probably the exception here, but some of those guys there, even some of the other players like JSN obviously wasn't going this high. Things change pretty quick. Rashee Rice was not going this high, although he's a tough example now at this point because he's not going to go that high. And obviously he was dealing with a suspension risk last year too. So just this wide receiver is not it's a consistent position year to year, and that the floor doesn't fall out, but like the players who score the most points, there is some variance there on a year to year basis. And that's why I think that, again, not saying that those guys are going to underperform the rookies of last year, but I think there is just like the talent level between those guys and some of the players that we're drafting in rounds 5 to 7. The gap isn't maybe as wide as like 4 or 5 rounds in fantasy ADP, or at least that's how I view it. Are there other players in this group that you think are really attractive picks, like a few in particular in this rounds 5 to 7 range?
I mean, we probably should have had Ryan Heath on with us because we're just continuously bringing up his name and his team here. I think he did such a good job.
Not we, just you.
You look at the guys he took here. I mean, Devonta Smith was the wide receiver 29 in this draft. That's incredible value. Smith was wide receiver 17 in fantasy points per game last year. Juwan Jennings at wide receiver 34. He could be the number 1 receiver on the 49ers this season. Josh Downs, who you've mentioned, who you like. I wrote him up in my breakout column that I've done. He's a guy, he went wide receiver 44 here. Like, what are we talking about? You look at Josh Downs last year in the games with Joe Flacco, wide receiver 8, wide receiver 25, wide receiver 16, wide receiver 34, wide receiver 21, wide receiver 75. He had one bad week out of all of these 7, and then wide receiver 18 in the final one. There's so much talent there. Sounds like Daniel Jones has a leg up in that quarterback competition. And Daniel Jones is a guy that peppered his slot receiver last season in New York. Wan'Dale Robinson had this huge year in terms of catches. Not a great fantasy season because he wasn't doing too much with them, but still, there is a sign here that Josh Downs could get a ton of volume, and we both agree that he has the talent to do something with it. I think he could be a top 20 receiver. So that's an example. Last time, hopefully, we bring up Ryan Heath, but that is an example of just the way to do it. Use all 3 picks in this range and come away with 3 receivers that have extreme upside, even though you got them in the middle rounds.
Yeah, no question. I think that actually is it's a good illustration of what this range is. And again, I'll harken back to history here. In the 2023 season, that was kind of, I look back at it as sort of the year of the veteran receivers kind of reaching, and maybe not a new level, but they certainly overperformed draft expectations, whether it was Mike Evans as wide receiver 5, DJ Moore wide receiver 6, Keenan Allen as wide receiver 8. Even Devontae Adams, he was wide receiver 11 that year. I think that was his second season in Las Vegas. So maybe that's not quite the same example, but again, like those guys like Evans, Moore, Keenan Allen, like these veteran guys that were ranked much lower than that, exceeding expectations. That's why this range is so appealing to me, because we have some of those potential candidates this year, in addition to breakouts that I really like, guys that we've talked about and we will continue to talk about. I like Rome Odunze in this range. I think Jaden Reed's a guy who could take another step. Josh Downs, we've talked endlessly about, and we will talk more about. George Pickens, I think, could take a step here as well. But some of these veterans in this range too, Calvin Ridley, now that he's not tied to, I've been charting Calvin Ridley from last year. Guy was playing really good football and just in a awful quarterback situation. He could be, I think there are paths to him being like a Terry McLaurin from last year, where just new quarterback comes in, pushes him to new level. Juwan Jennings is a little trickier to talk about because he sort of had his random breakthrough season last year, but he is a veteran player that's been around the block and is looking for a new contract. He could exceed this draft range. Steph Diggs, like now that it sounds like he's fully ready to go and not on the PUP list, he's a guy that I think could outkick his sub-wide receiver 40 ADP. So that's what makes this range of receivers so interesting, is not just these breakout guys that we're going to talk about, maybe new level jumpers. It's veterans that are in better situations than maybe given credit for on first glance.
And it's like I mentioned before, like the running backs in this range, so many of them have red flags. I think this is a bit of like a weird dead zone where I don't know that you want to be taking a quarterback or a tight end, and we can talk about that as we go here. And that's why I really think it's just all signs are pointing to receiver in this part of your drafts.
I love it. Yeah, this is definitely a place to be hammering those receiver picks. We are going to take our first break. When we come back, we'll talk through the quarterback position and where some of those gaps might lie right after this. All right, we're back. Love the conversations about the running backs and the wide receivers prior to the break. But Boone, let's get to the quarterback position for takeaway number 3. Beware the gap after the elite quarterbacks, which we've got listed here as Josh Allen, Jaden Daniels, Lamar Jackson, and Jalen Hurts. Do you view Hurts in this same kind of tier as those guys?
Yeah, maybe slightly below. I think he always goes beneath those 3, but still a guy that we know could have that monster season, right? He did it in 2023. We could see him continue to do that and put up big years. He has that rushing ability with the rushing touchdowns as well. So yes, I do consider him a guy that has that path to putting up the kind of quarterback numbers that can make a true difference, that can score, multiple fantasy points per game more than a lot of the other quarterbacks can or tend to on a regular basis. And this one for me is just becoming more and more apparent as drafts go. Having that advantage of one of those elite guys and having that weekly edge with the points that they can give you. Daniels and Hurts dealt with injuries last year, so that impacted them a little bit down the stretch there. It was Hurts. Daniels left, I think it was like a rib injury middle of the season that he played through, and some of his rushing numbers went down during that time. But I think all 4 of those guys could have those league-winning type years. It's a lot harder for other quarterbacks too if they don't have that rushing ability. And shout out to Mr. Konami Code, right? Rich Rebar, who was in this draft. You want to grab one of those quarterbacks that has the elite ceiling, and the rushing upside is what unlocks that. Maybe some managers see all those guys go off the board and then get worried, then they need a quarterback and then they go after one. I would preach caution here. I just don't think you need to grab a quarterback anywhere near the middle rounds. We saw Joe Burrow go off here, I think in the 6th round. And I would guess that Chris Allen probably regrets that pick. And it's not that Burrow's a bad quarterback. I mean, he had a great season last year. I'm not totally convinced that he's going to do that every year, but certainly a good quarterback. He's got 2 great receivers, so he's insulated a bit there. But when you look at where the other guys went off the board, right after Joe Burrow in round 6, we didn't see a quarterback go off the board until round 9. And again, you mentioned before an analyst draft versus maybe home leagues. I think that's another area where analysts tend to wait quite a while on quarterbacks. So we were all over this one. But you look at this, and I really think after those early quarterbacks go, do not feel the need to jump in there and get a guy just to fill out your roster. Wait, because there are so many quarterbacks. You could make an argument that from QB 5 or 6 to like QB 20 this year, I think any of those guys could be QB 1. So why spend up on one? Just wait and get one later, like so many people did in this draft.
Yeah, quarterback is so flat this year, and I agree with you that there's certainly things in this draft that are not akin to what it's going to look like in real drafts. Again, like in ADP, you just look at like right now, Baker Mayfield is a top 60 pick. Bo Nix is a top 80 pick. Kyler Murray is a top 90 selection. Guys like Baker and Bo Nix went in the 11th round in this draft. That's probably not totally representative of all leagues, but who cares? Because what you're saying there is still true, that you want to kind of like, what is the huge gap between Baker Mayfield and a guy like Brock Purdy or a guy like Jared Goff, even if we're skeptical about Goff a little bit? Like Baker certainly, well, I think Purdy's a better example because Baker was a proactive scrambler last year, but Purdy was one of the more efficient scramblers in the NFL. Like those guys are both, I believe, top 12 in total scramble yards last year. So kind of like arbitrage plays there with Bo Nix. I think they're like, Drake May could be kind of a Bo Nix arbitrage because he's going to run a decent bit. There's a lot of ways to sort of wait at this position. Are there guys, if you do wait, because you ended up waiting, you took Caleb Williams in the 11th round. I took Lamar in the 3rd round. We'll come back to like the elite quarterbacks to close this out. But are there guys that if you do wait and you are passing up the rounds 5 to 9 sort of quarterbacks, are there a couple of proactive targets for you that you considered here? Maybe Caleb Williams or some other guys.
Yeah, I mean, Caleb Williams is definitely one, and I think everybody sees a lot of the reasons for it, right? The new coaching staff coming in gives them a much bigger ceiling, I think, could get things right after having let's say, a dysfunctional coaching staff last year. That's maybe the nicest way that I can put it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's probably the nicest way we can put it. Justin Fields is somebody that has, I think, a pretty high floor and also offers you a pretty good ceiling as well. He's going to run a ton, doesn't have any real competition there. I don't think they're going to hand over the keys to Tyrod Taylor or someone. They're going to see if Fields can get this done and if he can potentially be their long-term answer at the position. So he's somebody that can put up low-end QB1 numbers and potentially get up into that, mid-range QB1 value for you. You can get him so late. He went in the 11th round here. Really like that one. But again, you were mentioning some of the names like Brock Purdy and Drake May. These guys didn't even get drafted. And that's the other thing to think about, because it's so flat and because there's potentially 20-something quarterbacks that I think have a pretty solid shot to flirt with QB1 numbers. You can wait. And even if, let's say for me here, it doesn't work out with Caleb Williams, I can go to the waiver wire and get a Purdy, a May, CJ Stroud, Jordan Love, Jared Goff, Trevor Lawrence. Like, there's going to be guys that I can stream. Even in more casual leagues, people aren't going to roster, and it depends. People know their leagues well. Some leagues are a little bit crazy, and even though it's single QB, everybody rosters a backup, and that changes things a little bit. But overall, there's normally some quarterbacks available on the waiver wire, and this year especially, I think there's going to be some surprising names that are still left out there after drafts. So I always recommend to people, don't blow 2 roster spots on 2 quarterbacks. Even if you're going to wait till late, I wouldn't do that. I would just take one, take a shot on the guy you think can actually come through. And if it doesn't work out, then you stream until you find one. And normally you can have some success doing that as well and playing matchups. And this year, I think there's going to be a lot of guys out there that you're going to be able to do that with. So I wouldn't, get worried about the fact that the elite guys are gone. Who should I grab? I got to get somebody. Don't do that. And then when it does come late, don't hedge your bet and go out and get 2 quarterbacks and think you're, taking 2 shots at it and giving yourself a better chance. I don't think you need to do it. I think you could just lean back on the waiver wire if that first guy isn't getting it done for you.
I think like how you approach quarterback is going to be sort of instructive for the rest of your team, which is it's not exclusive to this year. I think I've said that in previous seasons, but to me, it also kind of comes down to where you're drafting. And I think this was a great example. Like, you at the end of the 3rd round did not have the opportunity to take Lamar, Josh Allen, Jaden Daniels, because those guys went ahead of you, which just at that point, you don't know that going into a draft, but when you're in the draft in real time, then you can be like, okay, now it's time to start pivoting to these guys that you're just throwing out there, like some of the later round appealing players. But if you are picking early in the 3rd round, as I was picking at the top of the 3rd round, I just love taking the elite quarterbacks here because, like, look at all. And again, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see this. I think there are real flaws with basically every player that's a running back or a wide receiver. The tight ends also went here. We'll talk about tight ends in just a second. But some of these running backs and wide receivers, like I don't mind these players, but I just feel like so much more security just saying, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and take the, however many points Lamar Jackson's given me on a weekly basis. And I think that gives my team a little more upside than, well, all right, I took T. Higgins and it didn't totally work out this year. Okay, I took Chase Brown, but they did get Samaje Perine involved on passing downs, and he's a okay running back 2 instead of a running back 1. Or Kenneth Walker got hurt again, or Breece Hall is in more of a committee or something like that. You're giving up opportunity costs. I get that, but to me, Boone, like if I had my choice, I think I'd rather go for the elite quarterbacks and wait too long, even if there are some appealing bets later.
Yeah, I agree. I think, like I said earlier, I think going for either an elite quarterback or an elite tight end is a very smart move if you have the shot at them this year. Because if you get a Lamar Jackson last year, you get a Jalen Hurts 2023, you get a Josh Allen in his big seasons, you could potentially score like 3, 4, 5 more fantasy points per game than some of the other quarterbacks out there. And then you have these absolutely monster weeks where they just blow up and they win a week for you. There never used to be quarterbacks like that. It wasn't very, common. Now we have a few of them. And Jaden Daniels certainly could join that group and has, I think, a good shot to potentially finish as the top quarterback overall this year. So again, yes, I do think it's smart to go after the elite ones. You were in a position to do it. My advice more is if you don't get one of those guys, how do you approach it? And I don't think spending up for, a Burrow or a Mayfield or somebody kind of in the middle, to later rounds makes sense. I think at that point, you just wait as late as you can and keep an eye on what everybody else is doing so you don't get caught at the end of a run. But there's just so many guys out there that could give you decent low end QB1 numbers that you don't have to really worry about it until the final few rounds of your draft.
How do you rank the top three guys this year between Allen, Lamar, and Jaden Daniels? So Hurts is usually the fourth guy, so I think we can kind of just I assume he's four for you.
Yeah, I have it Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, and then Jaden Daniels.
Yeah.
I mean, they're, again, I will say they are all so close, though. Like,
Yeah.
we're not talking about like huge gaps between them. They're all so close. I'd be happy with any of them. And yeah, I think all three, you could make a pretty strong case for finishing as the QB1 overall.
Yeah, I just asked because I had the choice of all three, and I knew I was going to take a quarterback there, and I ended up going Lamar Jackson. And I don't have some like, hey, here's really how I split Lamar or Josh Allen. I mean, I think Allen obviously is a baller, but I feel a little more secure in just the overall, like how set things are in Baltimore, where I still think there's some flux at the receiver position in terms of roles and who's going to be on the field the most for Buffalo. Not that matters. Like, now we had this discussion on the show a lot last year. Like, can Josh Allen really be the QB1 or a QB2 overall? And like none of his receivers are super impactful in fantasy. And the answer was yes, he can. So I don't see any reason why he can't do it again. And I agree, Jaden Daniels has the upside to finish ahead of these guys. But, I've seen Lamar and Josh Allen do it for multiple years. And I think I can pick them, and it is nitpicking, but I think I could pick the most nits in Washington's overall environment than I can with Buffalo or Baltimore. That's for sure.
I mean, just look at last year, a case in your favor for Lamar Jackson, right? He averaged 25.6 fantasy points per game. The next closest was Josh Allen at 22.6. Like, that alone is such a huge edge. So yeah, you can't go wrong in any given year. It could be any of these guys, including Jalen Hurts. But yeah, I think grabbing one of those guys, if you can do it, especially going back to the other things like all the value at receiver in the middle rounds, you can backfill your roster and make up for the fact that you spent that early pick on an elite quarterback.
Let's go to the other 1Z position here. And the analysis is going to be pretty similar here, Boone. Beware the gap after the top three tight ends. Like, pretty much it's very copy and paste here. So talk us through your thoughts on this one.
Well, this will give me a chance to talk about why I took the fourth tight end, Sam Laporta. But yeah, the top three very clearly: Brock Bowers, Trey McBride, and then George Kittle. George Kittle went maybe a little bit earlier than usual here. Normally you get about maybe a little more of a value, maybe falls to the fourth. But overall, those are your top three. Those guys have the best shot to finish as the number one tight end on the year and be real difference makers at the position. Now, after that, the gap here was just absolutely massive, right? I'm going to pull it up. We're looking at normally Sam Laporta goes in like the, sometimes fifth, I think normally sixth round. Here we're looking at Laporta falling all the way to the end of the seventh. And that's why I think it was 2 shows ago when I talked about we were going over the Lions and some of the cases against some of the Lions players. And I said, I thought Laporta wasn't a great pick where he's going in drafts. And yet this is a good example of every single player is worth considering when they fall to a certain point in the draft. And at the end of the 7th round, a round or two after his ADP, I was then willing to go, I don't really love a lot of the players in this range, or I don't really need certain players in this range. I'm just going to take the tight end 4. He's the tight end 4 in my rankings. I'm going to take him and just set things at tight end before everyone else starts to get into that fight in the later rounds. Because unlike quarterback, where there are so many options, tight end's going to be a little trickier. I think there's going to be some specific guys that you want to target. You definitely got one in Tucker Kraft. But I think once you get to that range, it might be a little bit harder and you could find yourself on the wrong end of a run, especially when you're picking at the ends of the rounds like you and I were. So you might just want to step up and get that guy in the late rounds that you like. But regardless, huge gap there after the early guys. You're looking at a 4-round gap before Laporta goes off the board to me. And then, and this is why I say I still kind of regret the pick, even though technically versus ADP, he was a value. Because then we look again, and if I had known that we'd go another 3 rounds before another tight end went, and TJ Hawkinson. And maybe this is because it's analysts. Maybe that's the case, but TJ Hawkinson, just one of the best values probably in this draft, going off the board in the 10th round. If I knew I was going to have a shot at him in the 9th or 10th, I would not have taken Laporta where I took him. I would have taken someone else. So again, we go back to the same kind of thing. Like you said, it's the elite guys early, then you're going to wait and see where guys fall. Maybe you can get Laporta at a value. Maybe you can get Hawkinson at a value. If not, you're waiting until the later rounds and then trying to pick and choose the guys you really like there. And I have a couple who we could talk about, guys that I like in that range who I'm probably getting more than others. But overall, I think, again, if you're not getting an elite guy, you might as well wait at the position.
Yeah, I do want to talk about some of those sort of late round targets here, because it's not as clear at quarterback as it is at quarterback, where, oh yeah, okay, I missed out on the top 3 guys. I'll just wait. And like, there are so many guys, like I think you said, from QB 6 to 7 to QB 20 something, it's pretty flat. I don't feel that way at tight end, but I also feel, and again, maybe this is an overreaction to this draft versus like looking at ADP, because you mentioned you got Sam Laporta in the 80s, 84th overall. That's almost 20 spots after his consensus ADP, which is 63rd overall. So that was a value based on ADP there, even if you're not like a proactive Laporta drafter in his ADP range. But then we didn't, like you said, we did not see another tight end come off the board until the 11th round, where we had a huge run on the position, and it went TJ Hawkinson, Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, Evan Ingram, and I finished up at the end of the 11th round with Tucker Kraft. And that's just not what ADP looks like at all. It's not reflective of like all these guys going in the hundreds, because Kelsey's in the 70s, Hawkinson's in the 80s, Ingram and Andrews are in the 90s, and Njoku is ahead of several of the guys that went there. I just wonder, what the hell does tight end look like this year? It's the 10th round, not the 11th round, my bad. But it's just, again, what does tight end look like this year when we're seeing all of the like this giant gap, and like, how many bullish stands can we even take on some of these guys that are in this mid-range?
And it's not even just what does tight end look like and how does it all play out, but who of that group outside of those elite guys has a chance to get up into that range? Who's going to see the kind of volume? There's lots of talented tight ends. I don't think that's the argument at all. But who's going to get the volume that they need to actually compete with those top guys and to be, like I think we talked about in a past episode, the number 1 or number 2 target getter in that offense? There's just not that many of them, right? So if I'm looking as we go down, I will take a chance on Laporta if he's going to fall 20 spots below his ADP. Hawkinson as well. I'm going to try to get values on those guys. After them, Tucker Kraft is a great pick, right? A guy who led all tight ends last year in yak ability. You have, in yards after the catch, you have Jordan Love this offseason straight up saying that they're focused on how to get him the ball on offense during the offseason. I think that's important. Take that to note, right? Like, this could mean that Kraft could see a bump in volume on a team where they haven't really had that true number 1 receiver. So does that create a path where Kraft could potentially end up being one of the top 2 target getters in the offense? I think 3rd at worst he would be in the offense behind Matthew Golden, if he's what people think he can be. And then Jaden Reed, who I know you like. You got to look for these guys. You have to try to find these guys that have the talent, but also have the volume, because getting into the low end tight end 1 range for fantasy in a given week, it's not that hard. I hate ranking this position because 1 touchdown changes everything, right? You could end up with 30 yards, but you score the touchdown and all of a sudden you're the tight end 8 on the week. And yet you didn't even have a great game, right? You just found the end zone. That could be very volatile. That could be very tough to predict. So I always say tight end is by far my least favorite position to rank of the main 4 positions. But you're looking at it here. You try to find these guys late. Some of the other guys who I like, I mean, David Njoku, yes, overall, the talent is there. The situation, though, do you want to invest in that Cleveland Browns offense? Do you want to invest in that Browns passing attack when they're going to be shuffling quarterbacks through potentially all year long? Doesn't seem that exciting for me. So if I don't get one of the elite guys, if I can't find a value on Laporta or Hawkinson, I'm looking at Tucker Kraft. I'm looking at Dalton Kincaid, who has put up okay numbers. He just needs to stay healthy. And I know people can make the argument that he needs to be out there more often. And, he's not getting the routes. He's not getting all that stuff that he needs. But the guy has put up decent stats. As a rookie, he had a decent rookie year. He was primed for that next step. And then he was hurt most of last season. I think that really held him back. And there were situations where you just saw him and Josh Allen, they weren't on the same page. Like Kincaid would be wide open and the ball would sail by him. And you'd expect that from a bad quarterback. You don't expect that from Josh Allen. If they connect on a couple of those, you'll all of a sudden get a few more touchdowns now for Kincaid. He's right in the mix. So I don't think we should write him off at all. He's still someone that I'm looking at. And then the two rookies, Colston Loveland, Tyler Warren. We've seen rookies come in and make an impact right away. I think we have to look at rookie tight ends now when they go as early as these two did in the draft as guys that could come in and potentially have a fantasy performance that does kind of swing things a little bit for you, whether it was Sam Laporta a couple of years ago, right? Finishing as the number one tight end overall. I don't think we're going to see that from these two rookies, but I still think these guys have a chance to be low-end tight end ones or potentially mid-range tight end ones, because after those top guys, it's fairly wide open, right?
Yeah, it definitely is. And, I think that you can squint at some of these guys that went in this 10th round range and say, hey, they could be the number 2 target on their team. And that is like we've been saying, and you've been saying this, and I'm echoing it, that if you're not the top one or two guys, it is really tough. And, you might be like a boomer bust player. I think Tucker Kraft could end up being a little bit of a boomer bust player there, but I also like his odds to be a touchdown scorer. But, Travis Kelce, if Rashee Rice, he's gonna miss like 4 to 6 games. He might be the second target on that Chiefs team, even though no one really wants to get excited about Kelce at this point in his career. Hawkinson, I think the odds that him and Addison are the number 2 target are probably closer to 50-50 than people think, especially because Addison's going to miss some time. Evan Ingram certainly could be the number 2 target behind Cortland Sutton. So there are cases there. And then I love both the rookies. I agree. If you're punting the position, Loveland or Warren didn't even get drafted. We only drafted 12 rounds, but he didn't get drafted in this one. He's one I considered, like him and Tucker Kraft kind of against each other. And I just went with what I think is going to be a significantly better passing offense. But I want to come back to Kincaid because you mentioned him. He was the tight end 1 of Rich Rebar's team, and he took him in the 12th round. So his final pick. You're a Bills fan. So I'm going to run this by you because you know this team well. When I look at the Bills on paper, doesn't it look like one of either Keon Coleman or Dalton Kincaid kind of has to take a step forward for this pass catching core to reach its ceiling? Because that's sort of what I feel like. And based on, I think, in ADP, Kincaid and Coleman they're like touching tags. They're right by each other. There was a much bigger gap in this draft where Coleman went in round 9 and Kincaid went in round 12. But do you agree with that? And if you had to pick between the two, who do you think is more likely to take a step forward in Coleman his second season or Kincaid in his third season?
I think it's Kincaid. Like they took both those guys early. I totally agree with you that they're expecting, hopefully one, ideally both, to give them more than they've given them so far.
Nice, yeah.
Coleman was the kind of guy, I think we saw very early on when he came in last year that he was going to be a little bit of a project, right? He had that really fun personality, had all the enthusiasm in the world. But once he got out there, it was like, this guy needs to figure out how he can win in the pros. And I think it was pretty evident that it was going to take a little bit of time for him. Kincaid's had that opportunity, right? The time has been there. Now he's just got to get to it. And you look at him, I mean, he finished second on the Bills in targets last year with 75, despite the fact that he was battling through the injuries that I mentioned. So let's see if he's out there, if he's healthy for a full year, what does that look like? What does that number look like? Can he potentially be that, number 2 target in the offense? Now, the concern, I think, with him, and you could look at this with Kraft as well, have the Bills and the Packers just decided, like, we're not going to have a number 1 receiver. We're not going to have a guy that we're constantly going to. We're going to game plan every single week. We're going to spread the ball around. We're going to let our quarterbacks and, these offensive play callers really handle a lot of that. And are they going to have success doing that? I mean, you could argue that they have, right? The Bills have gotten away with it ever since Joe Brady took over. So do they necessarily need that guy to emerge as that, guy who can win no matter what, week in and week out? Or Do they just let Josh Allen kind of find the open guy? That's my biggest concern with Kincaid right now, because I think he was showing enough before the injury-filled year last year. I think he was showing enough that he was on a path to being a decent fantasy tight end. Is he going to be one of the, top 3, top 5 tight ends? Maybe not, but he can easily be a fantasy tight end 1, a top 10, top 12 guy. We just need to see him stay healthy, really.
Yeah, you can tell producer Colin's mad at Dalton Kincaid because he's got Dawson Knox as the starting tight end on this depth chart and not Dalton Kincaid. But you're right. He was the second most targeted player last year. I think people act like Kincaid has done nothing in the NFL, but a tight end breaking out in the third year in the NFL would not be that shocking, at all. Now, I think he's maybe not one of these athletic phenoms that have broken out later in their careers, but still, I mean, that's totally possible. And I think I'm not going to dive deep on the we're trying to create the number one wide receiver in the aggregate sort of point that you threw out there, because I could go for another hour on that. But
no doubt.
I do think that these teams, finding a number one receiver is easier said than done. And I think the Packers and the Bills are two teams that are kind of trying to create that in the aggregate, while both of those teams, again, holding out hope that some of their young guys, that because we're so impatient in the fantasy community, Jaden Reed is what he is. Dalton Kincaid is what he is. These guys are going in their third years. They could still take a step forward. And I think both those teams are kind of.
And I will say too, with Dalton Kincaid, you look at last year before the injury, he was on pace for 102 targets, and not that many tight ends had over 100 targets last year, right? And I'm pulling all these stats from my tight end breakout column where I wrote about Kincaid and Kraft, and I wrote about a bunch of tight ends. So people should go check that out. Did a whole series. I did every single position last year. But for Kincaid, I mean, on pace for 102 targets last year. The only tight ends that reached 100 targets last year, Brock Bowers, Trey McBride, Travis Kelce, and Jonnu Smith. So not bad company to keep, especially when you're playing with Josh Allen. If he can stay healthy, I think we could see something more from him. So certainly a guy that I think people shouldn't be giving up on yet. And that's another good lesson, right? Just because you were burned by a player in the past,
yes,
especially a young player, don't give up on them. Make sure that you're coming back with fresh eyes every season and taking a look at, can they still do it? Not just being mad and bitter and spiteful that they didn't come through for your team where you drafted them last year.
It's great advice. And I agree with you that I think it might've been our buddy Sal was posting this, who's somebody that you would never draft in fantasy again. And my thought is as long as the guy, like you said, is young and in the prime of their career, you should never. Now, certain players, if they're losing playing time, like a Kyle Pitts type, and there's negative signal there, that's one thing. But a proven player who's had good moments and just had a random letdown season, I definitely think you should never just cross them off your list. And same with these post-hype sleeper types. I think those guys are always good to sort of try to take advantage of a little bit of a bounce back there. But we're going to take our final break here. When we come back, we're going to talk through the best picks, the worst picks, real quick before we wrap up the show right after this. All right, we are back. Boone, let's keep this simple here for the final two takeaways. Takeaway number 5, who are some of the best value picks in this draft per you, the great Justin Boone?
Well, not surprising. It's guys, a lot of them are players that we've touched on as we've been going through the mock here. Chase Brown in round 3, like I said, a guy that I'm targeting in basically every single draft I'm in right now. I mentioned it before, but RB7 from week 4 on last year. Don't think that much has changed. Think he could have an even better season this year, and would not be surprised if he kind of comes out of nowhere to be a top 5 running back. Proved that he can handle the workload last season, proved that he can deliver. And I think he could be a first round value. I really think he's a first round value that you might be getting in the 3rd round. So people should be looking at him. James Conner, again, we went over it quite a bit, but RB23 in round 5, and yet he's finished as the RB6, the RB10, the RB9, and the RB14 in fantasy points per game since joining the Cardinals. Not sure why people doubt him every single season, but if you need another reason to like him, the Cardinals backs have the 4th easiest fantasy schedule at the position this year. So James Conner, while he's out there, is going to give you top 15 numbers. And if he misses time, just fall back. Go get Trey Benson like I did in this draft. It's not that expensive to get both of them and secure yourself that backfield as a whole. so many of the receivers from rounds 5 to 7. I'm not going to name all of them. I mean, Devonta Smith at wide receiver 29 was kind of shocking to me. I feel like he normally goes much higher than that. And Josh Downs, who we bring up constantly, those two probably stand out the most for me. But even Rome Odunze, like I think Odunze has a chance to be the number one receiver in that offense. When you have a new coaching staff come in, things are going to get shaken up. And I do like DJ Moore quite a bit, but with the way things have gone, with how DJ Moore acted last year, there's certainly a path to DJ Moore not coming through this season and the new coaching staff kind of moving on to younger players, whether it's Odunze, whether it's Luther Burden, whether it's the tight end like Colston Loveland. I could see someone else step up. And I think Rome Odunze might be another one of those guys where people feel a little burned last season that he didn't do that much, but he was trapped behind two really good veterans. He's not the same player by any means, but could he be that Jackson Smith-Njigba type player where he was trapped behind two veterans as a rookie, and then all of a sudden a new coach comes in and he gets unlocked in his second season and has a big year? I'm willing to take a shot on that where he's going. I'm not saying I'm guaranteeing that it's going to happen, but I think he's another player in that range that's pretty good. I can keep going here, Matt. Do you have any you want to throw out there so it's not just me firing all these off?
No.
Or do you want me to keep going?
Well, listen, I mean, I'll throw it back to you, but I just want to say on the Odunze thing, look, people know I was a big fan of Rome Odunze, and I made the point that people were going to make the same mistake that they made with Jackson Smith-Njigba in terms of like, yeah, not a good rookie season from a per route basis, this, that, and the other. That's exactly what people said about JSN after his rookie year, because as you mentioned, he was trapped behind two really good veteran receivers, and same with Odunze last year. I remember saying that. When he scored the 2 touchdowns against the 49ers, that was like in November or something. Like, just remember, don't make the same mistake in the offseason. And I've seen people make the same mistake in the offseason. Not that I think that DJ Moore is necessarily like he's done or he's cooked or anything like that, but he did not have a good year last year. And I just think it's a mistake for consensus ADP to have DJ Moore at wide receiver at 45th overall and Odunze to be 82nd overall. Like, that gap is too big to me. I think those guys should be closer. And even Luther Burden, who probably will rise. He went in the 9th round, I believe, of this draft. He just hasn't been involved in the offseason, but he certainly has a chance to go up as well. So I liked the Burden pick. Oh God, that was Ryan Heath's team. Damn it. Take it back. Edit that out. It was an okay pick. It was fine. It was a decent pick. I also did like his pick of Cedric Tillman, though, in the 12th round. I think Tillman is a nice value as well. So I really hate that I have also said nice things about Ryan Heath's team. But those are a couple picks that really stood out to me. I also think we didn't mention him when we talked about veteran receivers, but Darnell Mooney on Rich Rebar's team in the 8th round. He's not like nobody's going to do a victory lap or post the screenshot when they take Darnell Mooney in their draft, but he can very easily outkick this ADP because we just saw him do it last year with Kirk Cousins. And I do think Penix will probably more so hyper-focus on Drake London, maybe more than Kirk Cousins did, because I think that's just the type of quarterback he is. But I think that Mooney still has some upward mobility from his ADP, which, is wide receiver 49. I can easily see a scenario where he produces more than that.
Yeah, absolutely agree with you there. Mooney was a guy who I had him on some dynasty teams, but who I also got thrown in, it felt like, as like an extra piece in a lot of dynasty trades this offseason. Just not a name that people are that excited about. And yet he was having a pretty good year last year. So could certainly see him put something together and not be a guy that's going to be a volume hog and, win your league for you, but certainly a great depth piece on your fantasy team, a guy that could step in and be your wide receiver 3 or a flex, which is where he got drafted here. Some other guys, I mentioned Justin Fields before. I mean, him going in round 11 as the quarterback 11 after he was the quarterback 7 over the first 6 weeks last year with the Steelers. He's the quarterback 12 in 2023. He was the quarterback 6 in 2022. That just backs up this point that he can do it. The floor is so high because of that rushing ability that you're getting him there and you basically know what you're getting. And if he gives you a little bit more, great. But it's probably not going to be that much worse than that unless there's an injury, which we know can always happen. And not to always go back to my strength of schedule work and my strength of schedule matrix, but the 3rd easiest fantasy quarterback schedule this year for Fields. So you like that for him. They're going to give him a shot to be the guy there. I was really hoping he was going to fall to me at the next pick. I was going to take him and not Caleb Williams, but I got sniped on that one, unfortunately. And then we'll just bring up Tucker Kraft again, because I do think that is a really good pick. I think he is if not the guy, certainly one of the 2 or 3 guys that I would be targeting in the late rounds if I don't get one of those elite tight ends. We went over it quite a bit, but he certainly established himself as the starter there. Last year, we were talking about, is it going to be him? Is it going to be Luke Musgrave? Luke Musgrave gets hurt, and now Kraft is the guy without a doubt and can give you more than just, maybe he's like the anti-Dalton Kincaid, where Dalton Kincaid not giving you that much after the catch. The producer Colin jokes that it looks like he's, falling down when he catches the ball. Kraft just rolling with it. Kraft putting up really good stats after the catch. So that can certainly get him up a little bit more, even if he's not one of the top 2 target getters in that offense. So those are some of my favorites. Do you have any others that stood out to you?
No, I love Tucker Kraft. I was obviously the one that took him. So he's definitely, look, I'm gonna end up being pretty overweight on Tucker Kraft. I think he's a really good player. I also thought your pickup of Emeka Egbuka was good too. I feel like we've talked about him a lot since you've joined the Yahoo team here, and he's just someone that is an 8th round pick here by you, which he's not going to go in the 8th. Like, if drafting right now, he's not going to go in the 8th round in most leagues, although his ADP is climbing. He's 121st overall right now. He's someone that I could conceivably see, just depending on how the next couple of weeks go. Chris Godwin is not going to do team stuff to start training camp. That's obviously a concern. And just generally, like, the more people talk about him, if he gets a lot of pop out of training camp, he on paper looks like he could be the next JSN, the next Roma Dunze, like stuck behind 2 veteran receivers. But, whereas those guys who are maybe older, like Lockett or Keenan Allen, didn't really age out or were still prioritized. You just never know. Like, Mike Evans has missed a lot of time over the last couple of years. So Emeka Egbuka could be somebody that rises a bit, but for now I do think he's a pretty good value. But let's not be positive here anymore. Let's switch to our final takeaway, which is just which picks might people regret a little bit. I think there's some obvious ones like Rashee Rice, who went in the 2nd round here. The news broke after this. I'm actually curious, because we haven't talked about it on the show yet. What are you doing with Rashee Rice and all these Chiefs from a rankings perspective, even though we don't know totally how many games he's going to miss at this point?
Yeah, so Worthy's getting the obvious bump up. I don't really love Hollywood Brown in terms of fantasy. I mean, a nice real life player, but I don't think he's really going to have the kind of impact that his name suggests. He's like a household name that really doesn't come through for fantasy. I think the rookie, Jalen Royals, is a little interesting. Maybe he could step up and get some more work if Rice is out. But for Rice, I'm still targeting him. Like, we'll see where this ADP falls to, but I think a 1 to 4 game suspension is probably most likely. There's a chance that it could be more.
Really?
If that's all he misses, and if that's all he misses, that seems to be what some of the reports were out there, that the expectation is it could just be that. I don't know why everyone's jumping to the fact it could be like half a season. Maybe it will be. Maybe they're going to try to make an example of him. But right now, my projections, I'm operating like it's going to be 4 games or less. And if that's the case, he'll miss time early in the season when teams aren't on bye. So you'll have options to be able to fill the role. And this is a guy that could be a top 12 fantasy receiver when he's on the field this year. And I think in general, people overreact when this news comes out, right? People are, oh my God, this happened. Oh no, he's going to miss all this time. And again, it's not impossible that that's the case, but how many times have we seen guys get in trouble off the field? We all panic. Their ADP falls like crazy. And then it turns out the punishment isn't nearly as bad as we expected. So for me, I'm looking at this like, if he misses 4 games, I can live with that. I've obviously dropped him a little bit in my rankings, but I would be willing to take him at the end of the 3rd round into the 4th round, because once he's back, he is going to give me an advantage at that position. So I'm looking at it like just a nice discount that I'm getting. And that's no judgment on anything that happened with him off the field. People can feel however they want about that. I'm just looking at it from what we think is the most likely thing that could happen here. And I think a 4-game suspension or less, to me, is the most likely thing. And again, we mentioned the last episode, Drew Davenport of Football Guys. He does a great job putting his stuff out there, the fantasy lawyer. People should be following him. Make sure you see what he's, I'm using his takes as well when I'm factoring this stuff in. But that's how I'm looking at it. And I think we could be getting a guy in Rice. You get him in the 4th, maybe 5th round. We'll see how far that ADP falls. Last year before he got hurt, he was the wide receiver 5 in fantasy points per game. And I think the Chiefs have started to shift that offense towards him. I know they have some other pieces, but Travis Kelce is on the decline here. When Rice is healthy, he is going to be the number one receiver in that offense in my mind. So yeah, Worthy gets a bit of a bump up. Rice gets a bit of a bump down, but I am still taking Rice everywhere I can, and I'll just buy into that discount.
Yeah, I think you'd regret it if you took him in the second round, like what happened in this draft. But I was thinking more like 4 to 6 games, but I have no idea. We're totally guessing on this part. But I think he misses somewhere around it. Yeah, we're totally guessing, obviously. But I do think like a 4th round pick probably feels right for him. Guys that went in the 4th round here were Marvin Harrison Jr., DJ Moore, Mike Evans, Terry McLaurin, Tedder McMillan. Like there's plenty of risk, reward in those guys' profile. I think there's risk reward in Rice's profile. I don't think he's totally insulated even once he's back. I will say, actually missing some time at the start of the year might not be the worst thing for him as he recovers from injury. I'm going to point, because we do this every time in the offseason, Boone. We're like, oh, Tank Dell is he's in camp. He's practicing. Look at his videos on Instagram. He's all good. And then the second the games start, you're like, that guy's got Dell on the back of his jersey, but he don't play like Tank Dell. And I think that there's a chance that Rice, he's out there, he's practicing in full, blah, blah, blah. And then he goes out there and he doesn't look like Rashee Rice. Well, if he has like 4 or 5 games to, keep ramping back up, that pushes. We don't, again, this is stuff we're not qualified to talk about, human bodies and, health and all that stuff. But maybe there's a chance he's a little more rested and recovered, so he actually looks like himself once he gets playing, and you just didn't have to worry about playing him through the early season slump because he's just quite literally not available. I also do think there is some risk with Rice, though, that, hey, like Xavier Worthy takes a step forward. I think Jalen Royals actually profiles really well as a guy who can win in some of the exact same ways that Rashee Rice is. So maybe he's like a bit of a Rice insurance policy that they have there. So he could come back and not be the exact same target monster that he was, because some of those targets are a little bit Mickey Mouse anyways. So I don't think he's totally risk-free, but I agree with you that even with some of the suspension risk, I think like a 4th, 5th rounder is fine for him. And I'm sort of like a Xavier Worthy centrist. I don't hate him, but I don't totally buy him either. So I don't really have a strong take on that one.
I feel the exact same about Worthy. And to give a real life example, I just grabbed my phone to check the round that I took Rice in a draft that was happening over the weekend here. Went in the 5th round, and I was more than happy to take him in the middle of the 5th round as my wide receiver 3 on that team. Kind of some of the things we talked about with Chris Olave earlier, right? If you can get a wide receiver 3 who has that kind of upside, I'll take that all day long. And if it doesn't work out, I can live without my 5th round pick for a little while, or potentially even for the whole season. That is not going to tank your team entirely. Some other guys we could go to, Joe Mixon came up earlier. I think I'm very worried about Joe Mixon. You want to talk about a guy who is potentially coming into the training camp injured. They're saying he's going to be back at some point in training camp. They go out and show us that they wanted somebody else there just in case. They signed Nick Chubb. I don't think Nick Chubb is what he used to be, but I don't think he's nothing. Like, I think Nick Chubb is going to join this team, probably be a little bit healthier after, having an injury, big injury 2 years ago, could come back this year and is going to factor in. It's going to be more competition for touches than Mixon dealt with last year. And there was sort of like this perfect storm last season for Mixon where he was able to put up some good stats, didn't really have much competition. Now you have Chubb there, you have Woody Marks there. There's other guys that could get involved. On top of that, coming in with an injury, don't really want anything to do with Joe Mixon, where he went in the 5th round, which should be a value by all accounts, but not really interested in that. I still, even though it was a good value by ADP, I will still mention Sam Laporta as, in my mind, a bad pick, because I shouldn't have made it. I should have waited like I normally would, and I would have got an even better value in TJ Hawkinson a little bit later. So that one is just one. You always remember the ones that you regret, right? The great picks, who cares? The ones you regret, I look at that one and I go, I wasn't going to do it, and I let myself do it, and I feel like that was a bit of a mistake. And then the Joe Burrow one, going back to the Joe Burrow thing, Pat Thorman of Established the Run had a stat where Joe Burrow, I believe, had twice as many throws from inside the 5-yard line as any other quarterback in the league last year. So yeah, that's just one of those situations where that's going to regress. Burrow's still a good quarterback, but to take him in the 6th round when all those other guys are going so much later and there's another huge gap after him, it's a pick that we love Chris Allen, but I'm guessing that Chris probably looking at that one going, man, I should have waited too, just like I'm saying about Laporta.
Yeah, those like no man's land onesie position guys, Burrow at quarterback, Laporta at tight end. Those are definitely some that you almost always end up regretting a little bit once you make them, even if both of those guys went later in this draft than they would normally. So I don't think it's quite as like, it's not quite as bad, but then the gap between those guys and the ones that went next at their position was so big that I always, whenever I make those picks, I'm like, yeah, damn, I could have waited till, round 9, 10 to take a quarterback or something like that. Just we'll wrap this up on Mixon here because I think that one is interesting because, man, if teams speak louder with their actions than their words, the Texans have added a lot of stuff at running back. I'm not going to say they went out and got a difference maker, but adding Nick Chubb, adding Woody Marks, when they traded up to get Woody Marks, like gave up future draft capital, who at the very least is going to be is supposed to be a pretty good pass catcher. If Mixon's not out there in third down duties, we've already seen that before with the Bengals where that shaves off the fantasy ceiling. And that was, I think the Texans offense is going to be better this year than they were last year. I actually think there's a chance they could really, really take a couple steps forward if Nick Caley's that guy, but probably the Bengals offense of old is a little bit better than what the Texans are. So again, just I hadn't really had a strong take on Mixon until we got onto the clock, and I was like, yeah, I'm feeling much better about Alvin Kamara than Joe Mixon. So I think that's when you know what you actually think, and I think some of that does come back to just again some of the actions that the Texans have been speaking with of late.
Well, and that's one of the best things about doing mock drafts this time of year, about doing real drafts as well. And you just hit on it, right? The idea that when you are on the clock, when you have to make that decision, it causes you to either do more research or to really dig into your gut and just go, which play do I actually want to root for this year? Who do I want to have on my team? Who do I feel better about? And I always tell people, if they have a strong feeling that goes against what my projections or what my rankings are, trust your gut. This is your fantasy team, right? Same. We're here as guides. We're here to provide information. You can use our stuff, great, but you are the one that makes the decision in the end. So if you have a strong gut feeling, that's what you want to go with. That's what you want to build your team around, because you want to be the one that made that decision in the end. If it works or if it doesn't work, you don't want to have to be looking and, blaming someone else. You want to look at it and go, hey, I was the one that built this team. I'm the reason that I won a title. And yeah, I got to use some great resources, but it comes down to you in the end.
Yeah, this is a personal accountability podcast. You make your own decisions here. I had somebody ask me in my Discord over the weekend, like, should I do this, that, or the other, like a dynasty trade question? I was like, brother, it is your life. You could do whatever you want. Do whatever you want. I mean, you don't want to look back in anger on something that you decide. I didn't want to do that, but because friggin' Matt Harmon said to do it. Yeah, no, ridiculous. To the victor goes the spoils. You all are the victors. Like Boone said, we're just here to guide you along the way. And we guided you through the first big mock draft that we did this season. This was awesome. Boone, you are going to be doing the write-up so people can find some more information on this. If they didn't get enough from this hour-plus long show, you're going to have some more takeaways that people can find on the site, correct?
Yeah, my approach for that one is going to be round by round. So we'll touch on some of the things that we talked about today, but I'll also give more of a take of how people were building their teams and some of my thoughts on that as well. So it's fun. I love doing those, every year, kind of breaking that stuff down. And I'm glad Yahoo's given me an opportunity to do that this season.
I'm going to read it. And that would just be great if I pull this up and you just trash my team. That would be amazing. Just like,
well, that was my concern. We're thanking everybody at the top of the show. And it's like, and also I feel like I should warn you, I'm really sorry. We're probably going to take shots at some of these picks, but that's just the way it goes. And hopefully you don't end up picking on one person too much. We spoke so highly of Ryan Heath. Fortunately, there wasn't one person, at least not that I realized, that just drafted all these guys that were saying were terrible picks.
Yeah, that would be tough. That person's never coming back to draft with us ever again. That is for sure. But appreciate you putting this one together, Boone. This was a great episode. That is going to do it for this show. I can promise you there's going to be more mock draft pods, different formats. A lot of great stuff coming from Yahoo Fantasy. So again, make sure you subscribe on YouTube, wherever you listen to podcasts. All the great things. If you like what we're doing, leave us a rating, a comment, a review, the whole deal. If you don't like what we're doing, just move along and pretend like this never happened, and we'll just each go our separate ways. On Thursday, we are going to be back. Scott Pianowski joins the show to identify the 10 biggest fantasy storylines to watch in training camp and this preseason. Until then, we are out.